Welcome to the Parenting Coach Podcast with Crystal. Over 7 years ago, I felt like I was stuck in this cycle of yelling and reactivity in my parenting that I did not want to be in, but I didn't know how to get out of. I knew how I wanted to parent pretty much exactly, and I'd spent hours reading books, but not finding a way to show up how I wanted to. That's when I started to turn inwards. My own inward journey was what my family needed. As I changed, everything around me changed. My kids' meltdowns decreased by 90% or more with no medications or therapy. I stopped yelling, sibling fighting became almost entirely non-existent, and I found that this change flowed into other areas of my life too. My intuition increased. I started to run my life and business in a very different way. If this sounds like something you want to, I can help. Join me each week as I share my journey, including the laughter, fun, hard times, and tears. Tune in for support, guidance, and fun conversations with my favorite experts, and really anything else that interests me too. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Parenting Coach Podcast today. I know that I say this so often that I'm like, wow, I'm really excited for today's guest. And you're probably like, you always say that. And I know I always say that, but I do actually always mean it. And I especially mean it today. I can't wait for you to meet my friend and mentor, Melissa. I got to meet her in real life this summer in Las Vegas, and it was awesome. And she has so much wisdom to share. And this is going to be a really, really interesting topic that is very different from what we typically hear on this podcast. So welcome to Melissa Tears. Thanks for coming on and joining us today.
Sure. I'm always happy for a good chat, and something about an invitation from the parenting podcast, I find intriguing simply because I've spent many, many years working with kids and teens. And my last book actually was Integrative Hypnosis for Kids and Teens, Playing for Change. And so it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because so often when parents contact me to, help with their kids, just getting a little bit of context around what's happening. So much of it is really not about the kid's problem. It's the parent. And so, so I find that everything works better if I'm working with the parent and the kid together. Mm-hmm. Maybe not together in the same session, but certainly, that we come at it from both ends, because as you know, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast countless times, our kids are hooked in to our, nervous system. And because I'm a hypnotist, because I teach a course called Coaching the Unconscious Mind, I'm always hyper aware of the nonverbal communication that's coming through, of the idea that we can only be conscious, research indicates, of about 40 bits of information any given moment. And yet we are giving and receiving millions of bits of information. And this goes right past the conscious awareness. So we don't even know a lot of what we're transmitting and what we're picking up from our children. Mm-hmm. And just having this awareness that there's ways of, aligning things so that what you're giving off, even outside of your conscious awareness, is congruent with what you want to be transmitting to your kids, And so I train people how to literally kind of hack their own unconscious system,
And also, I should put a plug in that she's really good at this. I've seen it in real life and on Zoom. And if you're a coach or a healer or therapist, I highly suggest you check out her free courses. She has some free video trainings on things like EFT fast tapping and hypnosis that you can start using right away. And they're really effective. And also an integrative hypnosis course and coaching the unconscious mind course as well. So I'll make sure to have links to her website so you can check all of those out. But today,
I do a lot of free stuff so that it's accessible to people. And, I did one course, that's care for the caregiver. That while it was focused on a lot of, caring for aging parents, there was a lot of young parents where their caregiving was all about their kids. So, there's a lot there. just little tips and tricks and ways of shifting out of unwanted states. And yeah, it's free.
Yeah. And there's also some low cost ones, your pain relief one and sleep better at night one. Anyways, there's lots. So make sure that if you're not in Melissa's world, you are now, especially if you are in the healing space yourself. But today I want to dig into how can we use this so we know like there's so much more unconscious happening than consciously. How can we use that in our parenting? How can we help? So if our kids are so wired into us, how can we use that to help us parent in this way that's a little more responsive or attuned or securely attached or whatever? What can we do there?
So the first thing I usually do is I teach very rapid ways of downregulating our nervous system, right? Because it's really hard to make wise parenting choices when you're in the process of being triggered, when you're in a negative emotional state. It's really, that tends to be the lens with which you are viewing the situation through. So every time you're in a negative emotional state, if there's a little conflict or friction going on, that negative emotional state acts, as a pair of glasses that you're wearing. And it's really hard to find solutions when everything is being filtered through a certain, biochemical, neurophysiological state, which is your emotional state, as well as your brain starting to sort for like-minded states. And this comes into parenting in almost every interaction. And I think it's important to know. So the first thing is to just understand how things happen. So state-dependent learning means when you're in a certain emotional state, your brain starts to sort information by that particular thread, that state. So that's why you can, maybe your teenager does something and it's a little infraction, it's a little thing, leaves his socks on the floor, whatever. And you have this overwhelming response, right? That seems to be out of proportion with whatever just happened. That's because that triggers your brain to start lighting up every time they've done X, Y, or Z. And then what happens is the brain is really good at very fast processing. So it's not just every time they've, not cleaned up. The brain is a meaning-making, organ. And so what it then does is it starts to sort for every time your child didn't listen to you and then creates meaning out of that. They don't respect you, or they don't, or they're always this way, or they never. And so we start to use these universal quantifier words like you never do this, or you always do this. When the truth is, if you're not in a highly activated state and you can step back, you see they don't always do this. They don't never do this. But in that moment, your brain is simply running on a whole host of unconscious biases and heuristics, which is the way that it can process quickly and fast. And so it becomes that thing where, you are now thinking of something they said or didn't do 3 years ago and very quickly. So we are very rarely reacting to just that thing in front of us. It is what that thing in front of us reminds our brain of. And so knowing that gives you a little bit more of a reason to take a step back. And when I say a step back, I don't mean a physical step. I mean to do one of the, tricks or techniques that I teach, which is like putting a pause button on whatever the heck is happening, right? And one of those, which I can even share a couple here.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because I feel like we talk about this often of this idea of like, being triggered about something that doesn't seem so big, but it does. And that, like you said, it takes us out of that state of like how we normally would want to respond. And like so many people read parenting books and they're like, yeah, I know exactly how I want to respond, even but before the books. But it's that emotional state that
Right.
doesn't allow us access to respond in the way we want to. So I think giving the listeners here some ideas on, like, they're probably all like nodding their heads and like, yep, I know exactly. I was triggered 10 times this morning. Some tools that they can use in those moments.
Right. So the easy ones that I can do if you're just listening
Mm-hmm.
is, and I'm going to ask you to just do this with me, unless, of course, you're driving. Although it works while you're driving, that's only once you've practiced it. So if you're listening to this, I want you to take a moment and find a focal point, somewhere that you can focus on in kind of center view. So for me, I'm looking up slightly at the camera. And for you, I want you to just find a spot on the wall in front of you. Now, once you have that spot and you really look at the details of that spot, you're using what's called foveal vision, which is typically what gets triggered when you're triggered, right? Foveal vision leads to sympathetic arousal, which is the, fight or flight. Now, as you're looking at that, I want you to begin to soften your gaze and begin to, without moving your eyes, reach visually into peripheral vision, meaning become more aware of all that space around that spot, expanding your awareness of that space so that you can be aware maybe of the walls on either side of you. Expanding as if you could be aware even beyond the walls, expanding out even more. And as you are, as if you could expand all the way into that space, almost like you can expand into the space behind you. And then bring it back into focus. What was that like for you?
I started softening before you said softening because I knew you were going to say that. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm not at that spot yet. But as soon as I started to soften, I already noticed a shift energetically. It was small, but I could already feel something. And as I spread that out, I noticed like my peripheral vision, I could see it, but it was really kind of muddy. Like it was pretty soft itself. It wasn't clear. And I expanded it out kind of behind me and in front of me. And there's just something energetically that happens as you do that. Like I also think it probably takes you out of that, like, that part where your nervous system is like, this is a problem that's like right in front of my face that needs to be solved right now.
Yes. So that is so. And if they could see you, they would have seen your shoulders drop. They would have seen your breathing shift. They would have seen the muscles in your face relax. Because by shifting into peripheral vision, you are shifting into the parasympathetic response, which is the relaxation response. It naturally shifts your entire nervous system into a calmer space. But more importantly, for my purpose, it stops internal dialogue. And it's really hard to keep your stuff going without talking to yourself about what they should do or shouldn't do, what you wish you had said or didn't say. This is how we keep these emotional states going. Because the truth is, you have about 30 seconds maximum. Actually, maximum would be 90 seconds, but typically it's more like 20 to 30 seconds for an emotional biochemical wash to move through the system. But how do we keep an emotion going longer than that, you might ask?
We just keep thinking all the thoughts.
That's right. We keep throwing logs on the fire. If we were really good at practicing mindfulness or whatever, and we can just be like, oh, I'm feeling this emotion and just notice it, it'll be gone very quickly.
Yeah.
But we're not good at that. We're good at keeping it going.
Yes, that is so key because I've talked to people about emotions and processing emotions and like, let's get into the body. And it actually only takes 90 seconds and people rarely believe me. But it is that piece of like,
you can look at the research, but yeah.
right. But it's because our thoughts. And I'm like, well, did you stop thinking the thoughts or were you still like thinking more of the things? But when you can really drop out of that, and I didn't notice that when you mentioned like, oh, my, body was shifting and stuff, I can see that. But I also, you're right, I didn't have that internal dialogue going because I was focusing on something else.
Me, it is absolutely a pause button. The way that I refer to it for my own self is shift out and shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is what I do. Shift out and shut up. Now I'm going to ask your listeners to practice this one because I didn't get it right away because I'm like being quiet inside my mind is a foreign land that I just didn't even know how to visit.
Yeah.
This took me a little practice, but basically you are just shifting into your peripheral awareness and even beyond visual. It's more like an awareness of the space.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's ways that you can do this even through language, which is part of what I teach when I'm teaching practitioners how to, use inductive and deductive language patterns to kind of thwart what your brain is doing. And I just shared this one again on Instagram because it's just a good one, and I use it all the time on myself. And so it's when you're feeling triggered in any way. And if you're listening, just take a moment to actually feel what this does, because otherwise it just sounds a little weird. It sounds like a grammatically incorrect sentence. And there's a point to why it's grammatically incorrect, because we're trying to thwart the left hemisphere, which is your language centers. Your left hemisphere processes things in a linear, sequential way. So one way to thwart that, to interrupt whatever pattern you're happen to be stuck in, we want to get the left hemisphere offline for just a moment for change to happen. And so one of the ways to do that is if you're being triggered, if something is annoying you, if you're having an interaction with, your kid and you're getting a little angry, one of the questions I ask internally of myself is, what's everything I'm not noticing that's not that?
Mm.
Just feel what it does when you say it to yourself. What's everything I'm not noticing that's not that?
I'm doing this as you're saying it. And I did this in Las Vegas, and I really liked this one also. And it did stop my mind chatter immediately. I noticed that. Like I started just focusing in on, I don't know, something else. Yeah. And it just
here's what's happening, right? Because not just the double negation, but if you think about, as I said, the left hemisphere processing things in a sequential, linear way. If you ask a question like, what's everything I'm not noticing that's not that? Well, that's everything else. Your left hemisphere it would take forever to categorize everything you are currently not noticing that is not that, because that is infinity. And so it thwarts it for a moment, throws it over really to the right hemisphere, which is a little bit more creative and global, and processes in a different way. So anyway, it's one of those little tricks that I play on myself whenever I find myself ruminating on something or getting stuck. And you can directionalize that landing a little bit more, right? Like I remember someone I was working with a mom, and she was really having a lot of conflict with her teenager. And, it was like senior year and, going off to college and, all of this stuff. And she was just like, he's just not, listening to me. I mean, he doesn't even know how to do laundry. Like, how's he going to take care? The typical, how is he going to exist without me? When he's not even listening to me, we can't even have a conversation about all the things I'm trying to share with him that he's going to need to know. And he was just having a lot of conflict. They were fighting a lot. And it was really all about, him going away to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's everything you're not focusing on that's not that conflict about him going to college? And all of a sudden it just, because I directionalized it a little bit. And she started to say, well, he really did pull it out the last couple of years. He really set a goal. He wanted to get into these better colleges. He really hunkered down, on his studies and his homework, and he stopped going, like he really has been, helping himself to do this. And, now that I think about it, he really has been, much better at doing the chores and things that I ask him to do. And maybe it's just that he's wanting to, and she just is going on and on as she starts to relay all these things, that when she's focused on the problem of him not listening, she's no longer seeing all the ways that he actually is.
Yes.
And all the other things he's actually been doing that are beautiful to kind of get, because the more now, because remember, state-dependent learning. Now that she starts looking at how hard he worked to get into college, how much he's been going through his stuff in his, room, preparing, and organizing, and she's like, now that I think about it, it's basically so I don't have to deal with it. And then I just didn't have to say anything. She just kept going. She just kept finding all these beautiful solutions. She just kept saying, yeah, he's doing this and he's doing that. And I guess he's really been stepping up, and, he's probably feeling a little nervous about leaving me too, and all of a sudden she just basically did her own therapy. Yeah. All I did was ask that one inductive.
Yeah, I can relate to this. My son left for college like 2 months ago. I think it's been almost 2 months. And definitely moments of time going down to his room and being like, wait, I told you to, we have to actually go through this stuff. Like, are we ever going to get to college if we don't pack our things? And over time, I noticed that like, oh, it's probably because he's also resistant. Like when he gets in there, he's like, oh, what does this mean? This means I'm leaving. And
that's right.
It went beautifully, but he did call the other day to say, Mom, it takes so much effort just to like keep myself alive, like pay my bills and feed myself and like go to class. And like, he's like, I had no idea how much work it takes to like take care of yourself. And I remember that moment with my mom, calling my mom and being like, Mom, parenting is so hard. Like week 1, I was like, this is wild. So it felt like a full circle.
Yeah, no one tells you really. No one really prepares you for how much work it is, how full focus, full on.
I love that.
It doesn't end at college.
No, it just keeps going. And then there's more. I love the
keep on giving. Yes.
As you were chatting, I was thinking, I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to post this video below the transcript and show notes on the page so people can see. So if there's any other, like in the moment when you're feeling activated ones that are a little bit more visual, I think we could go over another one and get the video clip for people so they can see it also.
Sure. There's another one they don't even have to look at. And it's so simple. And most of us are like, yeah, I know. Breathing. It's just so common that we don't actually utilize it in a way that will change everything. So down regulation of the vagus nerve and the nervous system is one of the key crucial ways to simply calm everything down. And it's just this. You take a nice, slow, deep breath in. And as you exhale slowly, make it twice as long as the inhale. Do another one. You breathe deep and slow, as if you could breathe into your belly. And then you exhale very slowly, but twice as long. And then do one more. 3 is the charm. Deep breath in and exhale twice as long. And what are you noticing?
It was interesting how much changed on the third one. Even on the first one, I already felt a relaxation of my muscles, I think. I think I'm probably holding them a little bit tight as I'm thinking about, oh, what am I going to ask? And like all the podcast things deep down there somewhere. And so I think just like the break from thought, there's no thought except the breath. And then also the relaxation of muscles. But then on the third, it felt like a little bit deeper.
Yeah, because that's when it really lands. The vagus nerve, which is just the nerve that goes from the brain stem all the way down through your heart, through your lungs, down to your gut, and back up again. And it really is the way that the body speaks to the brain and the brain speaks to the body. It is crucial for regulation, for fight or flight, for rest and digest. You've got another branch of it that goes through to your ears and your jaw and your face. And that is why facial expressions can cause us to go directly into fight or flight because we are sharing information. Remember, I said being aware of the nonverbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
So quite often, it's good to understand how your nervous system gets triggered as well as your kids. And there's certain clear markers that we can make sure we're not giving. And because that shows up on our face, it's hooked into our ears and our jaw and our facial muscles is one branch of the vagus nerve. You want to be aware of how much information you're giving by your tone of voice, your lack of tone, by your face, by the subtle micro expressions. And I don't mean this to add more pressure to parents to now have to worry about their face. But I'm going to tell you how we can hack this so that it's easier. But one of the things that your nervous system is always asking, and so is your child's, that is, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? That is the only thing your nervous system cares about.
As soon as you said one thing that they're asking, I was like, oh, it's, am I safe? Because it is. And every time I talk to people about, their own childhood and it comes back to that, almost every time they don't say it wasn't words that their parents said. They think it was, but then when they think about it more and they get back into that memory more, they're like, oh, it was their facial expression, or it was their tone of voice, or it was the drop in like their body.
Yes. So here's the thing. One of the things that triggers our nervous system is when we see, a facial expression or a lack of a facial expression or an incongruency in the face and the messaging. So the flat face, they've done horrible research with that, where, they just take a parent who's playing with their child, and then at a certain point, they flatten their face. They call it the stone face or whatever. And I'll never forget seeing that and freaking out in a psychology class because I just thought it was immoral to do this to these babies. Because immediately, as soon as the parents stopped making any facial expression, the distress in the baby and the toddler was so instantaneous and hardcore as the child is trying to get the parent to smile back at them and to interact, and eventually leaning on the parent's chest in like total despair. And it was less than a minute, but it felt like forever to me watching it. I walked out of that class in a huff. I was like, there ought to be a law against doing that to kids. Fuck you and your research. Anyway, I got very triggered by it. But that is one of the main ways that our nervous system is sorting for how safe someone is. If they have a lack of facial expression, like some, like some sociopaths,
Yeah.
that reads, that sets off an alarm in our nervous system that something is not right with this individual. Remember, we're herd animals. We are highly attuned to the emotional regulation of the herd. And when it's parent and child, we've got so much more attunement going on. So your facial expression sends so much information, but so does your tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the other things that triggers safety or not safety is the lack of what they call prosody, which is tonality shifting, right? So every animal, every mammal, and then some that aren't even, will have some way of doing what's called parentese, motherese, it used to be called, but fathers do it too, where we naturally do it all across the animal kingdom. We build our children and our babies' brains by speaking to them like this. Hello, it's musical, and it soothes them. So I always make a joke when I'm teaching about downregulating the nervous system, that if somebody came up to your baby or even your puppy and said, hello, baby, how are you, baby? You'd run.
You'd be like, alarm bells.
That's right, because it's not right. And I always joke about, how Hollywood knows this even before the research came out, because I always joke about The Shining and those two twins, which to me it's still iconically two of the most frightening images, people on film. And why? What made them so scary?
The lack of facial
expression, the monotone, play with us, Danny, and the stillness of body, because humans are not meant to be still. Those are the three things. So quite often, parents who mean well by trying not to blurt out what they're saying, by trying to control their face, are actually making it worse. Right?
Yeah.
So in those moments, to be able to shift out into peripheral vision, or to be able to just take a deep, slow breath in and exhale twice as long to downregulate their system, to immediately see their child in every moment that's not that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's a skill, but it's one worth cultivating, right?
Yeah.
Because of how, I share this with my classes a lot. It comes from one of my favorite minds in the field, my very good friend, John Overdurf. And many years ago, he was teaching a class at my center, and he had everyone break into groups. And he said to them, well, one half was sent out of the room, so they didn't know the directive. The directive was, all you're allowed to say once they start talking about their problem is tell me more. But at a random moment, I want you to change the way you see them in your mind. In other words, see them smiling. And I thought, it's a test of nonverbal communication, of leakage, of how what you're envisioning is going to leak out of your face. Me and I'm always looking for what's
going on.
Yeah, what's the science behind what he's trying to tell us to do? But I will never forget this moment, because I was with someone and they were talking about almost, maybe they're going to get evicted and they're having a fight with the landlord, and they just took in this foster dog that they really love, and what's going to happen to the foster dog, and, da, 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 da. And they're just digging into a hole. Now, if you know anything about my coaching style, the last thing I would ever say to someone is tell me more when they're digging themselves into a hole. I don't do that kind of work, but I was a student in this class. So I did it. And at a random moment, trying very hard to control all of my nonverbal communication, I pictured her smiling. And I swear this is going to sound very woo-woo Californian, but I duplicated this little research study for years with every new class because I just couldn't believe the results. As soon as I saw her in my mind smiling, she was in mid-sentence of complaining about what was going to happen to this dog. And she's like, well, I mean, you know what? The alternative is they're going to kill him. So I guess even sleeping on a friend's couch with me is going to be better than that. And, my friend has a brother who's like, a lawyer. I bet you I could put some of that in escrow, and then at least I would have backup, and we could kind of like do.
And you didn't say tell me more. You just did the random moment in your mind thinking.
Yeah, I just changed the way I was seeing her in my mind.
Wow.
Now, this is going to sound insane, I know, for someone who's so neuroscience based, but listen. My friend John then said a quote that I have been sharing for probably about 16 years now, because that's how long ago it was. He says, the way you see any individual in your mind is the best they can ever be in your presence.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Wow.
The way you see any individual in your mind is the best they can ever be in your presence. And think about that. After that class, I had a client who was a psychiatrist who was having trouble with his child. And he described her as a hellion. He's like, she's like, I don't know. She's like a demon seed. She just like, she screams and she throws herself on the floor. It's insane. Nothing like my other daughter. And, I think she has oppositional defiant disorder. And of course, he's a shrink, right? So he's like already diagnosing. And I'm like, how old is she? 4. She's 4. But, anyway. But then he said something that was telling. He said, my mother-in-law thinks she's an angel. Whenever she's with her, she's fine. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I shared with him. I said, guess what I just heard this weekend? And you are proving this goddamn point. It's like, think about it. Because believe me, I've thought about this a lot. Because I was like, how is that working?
Yeah.
That just makes sense to me. Unless it's just the nonverbals, unless it's just all of the unconscious information I'm sharing. But it seems to work instantaneously, even when I'm trying to, not show my facial expressions. But when you hear a joke from someone that you don't like, it's not funny. You could hear the same joke from someone you do like, and it's funny. It's like, right?
Yeah.
We bring out what we expect from people. Now, there was another study you're probably, as a parenting coach, aware of, where they took students that, as much as they could get them to be equally, across the board as you can with kids, like socioeconomically, grade-wise, their aptitudes, they tried to make it both groups as evenly matched as possible. And they told one teacher they were getting the gifted students, and the other teacher they were getting the challenging students. They had tested them before this. And then after, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe a month, which again, don't get me started on these. We should never be studying
the immorality of doing this kind of a test.
Right. But after a month, the kids that were thought to be gifted scored higher, and the kids that were thought to be challenging scored lower. think about it.
Okay, I just did a podcast episode called Breathing Belief into Your Kids. And the idea was that we can believe something that we don't even see evidence of in our kids before we see it. Like that they are great listeners, that they are self-confident, that they are great at regulating their emotions. And I've seen this play out both ways, for good and the bad, in my own kids, which is why I started talking about this. And I love that this ties in so seamlessly with that. It's that they really do just behave how we expect them to.
Yeah, our expectation comes across in millions of little ways that we're unaware of consciously. You are only consciously aware of the smallest, thinnest slice of your cognitive processing. So much of it is outside of your awareness. So holding these ideas in, like how I see my child is the best they could be in my presence, will help you to shape all of the stuff that's leaking out of you that's outside of your conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not even that you breathing belief into them is what's doing it. It's you believing that. That's probably more at play.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. This has been so fascinating. I feel like this is so much to chew on. Like, I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this episode because I have had this idea of breathing belief into kids for a long time, and I've been talking about it and workshopping through it. And I love this idea of like, it's actually your belief. It's your belief in it that makes it happen. So, thank you for spending time with us, for sharing these tips.
Sure.
And
I'm always happy to do what I can, to help parents because it helps kids, because we all need help. Because we're all humans trying to do the best that we can. And, people don't prepare you for just how damn hard it is to be fully responsible for someone else's life.
Yeah.
When we have our own lives that we're trying to be responsible for, it is a thing. It is a thing. I mean, look, my daughter is my biggest blessing in my life. Obviously many parents believe that too, and it is the thing that has made me grow unlike any other thing. So she is my lessons. She is my teacher. She is, on every level.
Me too. I think that every day.
She's in graduate school to become a mental health counselor that works with kids.
Wow.
But she's amazing with kids. Anyway, so, we ripple it out in ways that you never know, right?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Melissa. And if people want to connect with you, do you want to just mention maybe on Instagram or?
Yeah, Melissa Tears on Instagram or melissatears.com if you're a practitioner interested in, taking any classes. There is a bunch of free stuff and low cost stuff. I try to make everything as accessible as possible to people. If you're interested in one-on-one work, I have a wait list there, as well as a whole directory of amazing practitioners on my site so that you can find what you're looking for.
Thank you so much, Melissa.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, I would love for you to help spread the word by getting this message of support and guidance out to as many people as possible. So text it to your best friend or tag me on Instagram and share it. Leave a review, rate it, subscribe it, or follow on your favorite platform. Send me a DM on IG letting me know which parts have impacted you or what you'd like to see on future episodes. We'll see you next week.